I'm going to start with a little bit of a recap of what we did last week. And it's really good to do that, to go through those PowerPoints, even if you only have a little bit of time to just glance through them. And remember, everything is posted on Blackboard. The course outline notes that I follow, the PowerPoints that we give you in class are there. And so when it comes time to take a test or review, you have visual ways to do it, you have other ways to do it. How you doing there?
I gave you a visual.
I know, that was a visual win. All right, so we started to talk about sort of looking under the hood of life, and then what we were starting to look at in this first introductory section was different types of associations between anatomy and physiology, needs that organisms have and how they're met, and the benefits. We're going to go over a little bit today the benefits and drawbacks of being larger organisms. And today we're also going to look at regulating that internal environment and also how do we communicate within the different cells of the environment. And we'll talk a little bit, just a very brief entry right now, about the endocrine system, the use of hormones, and the neurological system. Okay? So let's just look at what we did last time. We looked at that intimate relationship between form and function, which in biology we call anatomy form, and physiology function. And you guys seem to think that this one would win in a race a little bit better because of its streamline in nature. And maybe Michael Phelps would win in the 300-yard dash because he's sort of built for that. But yet, this type of body form would have other advantages, and he's a good sumo wrestler. Okay. We also looked at the fact that you can tell and how an organism lives by just looking at different body parts. And so you looked at the streamlined nature of this fish, and it could go really fast. And then we looked at this desert hare, and we saw that it had a jumping system that made it very fast, and because it was in the desert, it had these big ears to get rid of heat. And we also discussed briefly why this desert ant has such long legs to keep it from the heat of the desert. So these are all adaptations that animals have that allow it to live in the area that they do. Okay. And here we also mentioned something called convergent evolution, and that means that even if you didn't have the same evolutionary line, because you're dealing with the same physical properties of Earth, and you may come up with the same solutions to the particular problem. You want to go fast in water, you're going to be streamlined. And so this is convergent evolution, meaning many different evolutionary starts, same kind of evolutionary answer. Okay. We also said that this relationship between form and function goes on every single level, from molecules and actually lower than molecules, all the way down through the whole organisms. Another thing that we talked about is once you get to multicellularity, you have to start with the arrangement of those cells so that you can still get contact with the environment in some manner. So a single cellular organism can get contact with the environment for waste, for food, and things like that. Once you get to multicellularity, you have different issues and different problems. The very first stage that different evolutionary organisms developed was this two-cell system where every cell is either facing the external environment or the external environment can come into the internal. But it got to be a problem when we have large multicellular organisms, and that's why there was this development of all these different organ systems so that every cell in the body can get food and oxygen and also get rid of their wastes and their waste systems. And so this semester we talked about, we're going to go through this system by system starting Wednesday. All right. So what we started to look at was the tissue level of organization. Last semester you studied cells, and then we want to look at groups of cells that are kind of similar in function and appearance, and they work together for a common function. So that would be tissues. What we also started to look at is different types of tissues. So these were the epithelial tissues, and they line the body on the outside, and they also line organ cavities. And here you can see, we looked at a sample of it because they're linings and they form barriers. They also are cells that are really compact and together adjacent with one another. And you can see there's a free surface, and whether that goes to the external environment or to the lumen, meaning some internal body cavity. And then there's also a grounded area, the basal surface, which is attached often to connective tissue, which we started to talk about. We also said we could see this relationship between form and function by actually looking at the shapes of the cells. And so when we looked at these epithelial cells, these very thin ones, these very flat thin ones, allow for gases and also diffusion between the inside and the outside. So we came up with the conclusion that they must be in places where you need a lot of transport. So the linings of the lungs and other places, linings of capillaries and things like that. So that had a lot of transport. We also looked at the cuboidal shape, which gives us a little more structure, a little more function, and we said that they are there. They can line tubules. They can also have other functions, other more cellular function, maybe producing more things. And then we looked at these columnar cells, and here are some columnar cells, and those cells are going to be in places where they actually have to produce or absorb and reorient these different molecules. So we see these in the digestive tract, and we also have these pseudo-stratified ones as well. They look like they're multi-layers, but they're really just one layer. We also mentioned some modifications that they have. They sometimes have cilia on them, like in the trachea. So they can not only, these cells would have these goblet cells on them, which produce the mucus, and then the cilia would help move anything that was trapped by it and bring it down to swallow. They're named by their shape, their strata, meaning if they're single layers or if they're multiple layers. So if they're single layers, like this and this and this, that's going to be simple. And then the next word of that is simple what? Simple shape. And so is it simple squashed? So that would be simple squamous. Is it going to be simple cubes? That would be simple cuboidal. Or is it going to be long columns? And that would be simple columnar. If there are multi-layers, like we have on our skin, then it would be stratified, not simple, but the name that we put on it, all of these can have different shapes. See, these look kind of cuboidally, but these look sort of squamous. So when we name it, we actually name the top level, and the top level here is squamous. So this would be stratified squamous. So also notice that these epithelial tissues are very compacted together. It's cell attached to cell attached to cell, so they could form these barriers. Whereas we looked at, last time, we looked at also this connective tissues. Connective tissues might have cells sort of scattered in different places, but there is a matrix that's there. And so you would see, different types of matrices, meaning the background that they're kind of sitting in. Sometimes it can be solid, as in cartilage or bone. Sometimes it can be liquid, as in blood, the plasma, that would be that matrix. And sometimes you can even have them sort of mineralized, as in bone again. Also, a lot of connective tissue has fibers in it. Not all of them, but a lot of them have fibers in it. And depending upon what their function is, remember anatomy and physiology, what their function is, they would have different types of fibers. Are they going to have very strong, solid fibers, dense, regular fibers to give it that strength? Or maybe in an organ that has to stretch in and out, they might have these elastic type fibers. So all of those are going to be different, and those make up all of our connective tissue that we had. So you can review the connective tissue. Bone, we talked about the function of bone, and I was glad that a lot of people knew that it wasn't only just for structural support and locomotion, but a lot of you came up with the fact that it makes your blood. The bone marrow makes all your blood. You store calcium, and calcium is needed for an enormous number of regulatory functions in the body. So we did that. We looked at fat, and here's, you should visually be able to get used to seeing what these things look like. And we said that fat, also known as adipose tissue, is really important for protection, padding protection, and they store a lot of energy. We also use some type of fats and some steroid hormones. You need fat for that. And another thing is, every single cell of your body is made up of what? A what membrane? What's that other name that you have?
Lipid.
Yes, a bilipid membrane. So if you think about how much fat you need that for every single membrane in your body. So fat is not, I know we gain too much fat sometimes, but it's not a bad thing. In the right amount, you certainly need it for every cell of the body. We looked at blood. What is the function of erythrocytes? What is it?
Red blood cells.
They're red blood cells, and what do red blood cells do? What do they carry and distribute throughout your body? Oxygen, yeah. And what about leukocytes? White blood cells, exactly. And what do they do? Right. They help you fight infection. They're important in immunity. Plasma, that's that liquid that's going to carry everything. We went over a few functions of that. Platelets, does anybody remember what platelets did? Yes.
Clotting.
Exactly. So you need them clotting, and you need appropriate clotting, right? You want to clot when you get a cut. You don't want to start clotting inside your blood, where it will then move to other parts of the body and block functioning that might end up as a stroke or something like that. Yeah.
So when people are hemophilic, do they just not have platelets because their blood can't clot?
Well, there's a lot of clotting factors, and we'll get into it. So different types of hemophilias will be missing different types of clotting factors. So when we show you the clotting cascade, we can show you different types of hemophilia that those people might be missing or have in low quantities, so that they don't clot as appropriately as other people. Okay? All right, we looked at cartilage, functions of cartilage. Anybody remember some of the functions or where you have it? Anybody want to raise their arms? Yes. In your joints. Okay, the tips of your bones. You're going to have them at the tips of your bones. Also here at the tips of the bones. So, if you've had an injury and you're running bone on bone, that's not really good. And also, you are formed. A lot of the long bones in your body, when you're embryologically formed, start out as cartilage, and then they're turned into bone. So we also know that we have the nose, the ears, the discs, and also at the ends of our bones. Okay. All right, we also talked about muscle tissue. Okay, we remembered 3 different types of muscle tissue. So which type of muscle tissue do I have when I do this voluntary movement, where you're building out your biceps and triceps? Which one of these? Skeletal, right. So here's the skeletal muscle, and you can see the striations. Those are formed by those bands when they, actin-myosin bands when they're sliding. And where do you see smooth muscle? Yes, in visceral organs, digestive system, and you don't see those bands there. I mean, there are actin-myosin that act in a different format. And what about cardiac muscle? Where's the one place you have cardiac muscle? The heart. Okay. And is that voluntary or involuntary? involuntary. So voluntary, involuntary, involuntary. All right, so we looked at and nervous tissue. We're going to talk a lot about nervous tissue. We have a couple of sections on the nervous system. And so we looked at just the basic structure, the dendrites who are bringing all the information in. We have the cell body where the normal functions of the cell occur. And we have the axon, which is going to deliver the information. What did we say glial cells are? They're support cells, right. So nervous tissue, even though you call it tissue, it doesn't mean that every single cell has to be the same. It's what's in that tissue and they work together for a general function. And so they're going to be things like there's a myelin sheath, there's cells that are actually wrapped around a lot of axons for that neurological transmission to occur faster. And you have immunoprotective cells, you have secretory cells. So there's a lot of different functions. And in fact, when most people get neurological tumors or cancers, nerves don't generate as much. Normally, it's some type of glial cell which just goes crazy or is affected.